Hi everyone and welcome to my Reign of Arrows guide for Season 6. We have the mid-season patch just around the corner, which brings various buffs to this build and others on the Rogue. So overall Rogue is looking really good. This is a build I have played lately that is based on a Darkside's version on Maxwell. He also wrote a guide for it that will show up in a moment. And it's actually a very fun, cool build. Reign of Arrows is a much beloved skill. It's like a fan favorite, I guess, but it rarely has ever been like a meta build that is actually performing really well. But as you can see here, we are cruising through tier 100s of this, and this is before the patch that buffs this by another few pit tiers. So overall, this is looking like a really strong build that you can play. You can easily fix your glyphs, get them all the way up to level 100, and you can just blast through like any content in Torment 4. You can, blast down tormented bosses, no problem. And it does have, a lot of like gear late game scaling, but it also works just fine, even when your gear is not absolutely perfect. I'll show you the planner. I have a standard and a mythic version, so in case you don't have all the gear just yet, you still can get going with this. The main idea behind this build is that you spam Reign of Arrows as much as possible to deal damage. So this is actually your carry skill here. It's an ultimate based build. And you see here we can cast it as much as you want to pretty much. So we have a cooldown reset combo where we use the Beastfall boots and preparation and enough maximum energy to reset our Reign of Arrows instantly all the time. The way this is done is with Flurry. So when you use a core skill with the Beastfall boots, after casting an ultimate, it will spend all of your resources. As you can see here, my energy goes down to 0 and then it comes back really fast. Why it comes back, I actually can't explain very well because that seems somewhat buggy, but this is how it works. But you basically get a lot of energy back first from the Beastfall boots, and then you also have other like resource generation effects in the build. That could be innovation ranks, it could be aftermath ranks. So in case it doesn't come back all at once, then you can also invest into some things on the passive tree for this. But it turns out this is actually not really necessary in the late game. Once you have the really good setup, you can just free up a few more points on the tree. So you'll see this in the skill tree when I go over it. But yeah, overall, you see that we just cast Flurry, we cast Rain of Arrows, Flurry, Rain of Arrows, and so on back and forth. And like this, you get massive damage buffs. And the good thing is that because of this, everything else also constantly resets. So we have preparation, which resets all of your skills every time you cast the ultimate, which happens like once to twice per second. So you can throw as many smoke grenades as you want. You can do Dark Shroud all the time, have them at 5. You can do the Shadow Steps. You can do Poison Trap here, for example, that I have for like the higher tiers. In lower tiers or in Torment 4, you can also just have Dash as another mobility skill, for example. You don't really need that Poison Trap. It's just a bit of extra damage for the higher end. And you can also tweak this a little bit more if you want to your liking. Now you may be wondering, why do we use Flurry in this build when we play with Precision? You can see the Precision stacks here on the bar. This is like the big key passive buff that actually produces most of this damage output here for Rain of Arrows. This is a cold crit based build for the Precision key passive. It is not a poison build like, for example, we used to play it in the past. And now we use Flurry of this. Well, it turns out that for some reason, Flurry can stack Precision, even though Precision says that it only works with marksman skills, meaning the range skills. So this is just how it works. And this allows us to, for example, use Flurry as a mobility tool as well. We get a bit of healing from it if we need to. And we could just use that as our core skill to trigger Beastfall, trigger Precision, and just kind of do the entire combo. So for now, this is kind of weird, but it works. But it also doesn't really hurt the build too much to go with another core skill. You may have to tweak the Paragons a little bit though, because for example, we have Tricks of the Trade. Or at the very least, if you want to not play with Flurry, but you use, let's say, Barrage instead, or Pen Shot, or whatever other skill you want to use to stack Precision, then you would have to use the Shadow Step, for example, to actually trigger Tricks of the Trade. So there's like a little detail here, but you can use other core skills if you want to. Now, one important note about this build that you should be aware of before you start out with this is the boss fights. So you just saw this in a previous clip where I kind of just like turned around and walked out because some bosses on the higher tiers get really, really tanky on this build. This is a build that has, number one, a really big scaling with extra adds because of the trigger tax passive. This is a passive that increases your crit damage by quite a lot, especially combined with the Cloud of the Nameless Helm. You get tons of extra damage when there are adds on bosses, and when there are no adds, you don't deal that much damage. So this is kind of like an unfortunate side effect of playing a precision build, and this build suffers greatly from it. So you have to kind of be aware that when you go towards those higher tiers, yeah, some bosses die really fast and some bosses die really slow, depending on if they have adds or not. And in addition to that, the hitboxes also matter because you have like these hundreds of arrows coming down all the time, and the larger bosses get hit by more of them and the smaller bosses get hit by less of them. Not so much of an issue in like typical fights towards the boss as you like, blast down elite packs and so on. But on the bosses, there is actually a pretty large variance of your damage output. And I'll actually show you an example of how good this can look. This is a 97, this is not a 100 as you just saw, but this is like another run that I have recorded where we got a Spirit Caller of Frost. The ads spawn exactly when you stagger the boss and you see how he suddenly starts melting. It's not even like a very large hitbox boss, so there's actually others that also die in like, even faster in some cases. But you kind of see the difference here that this can make. So this is like just this insane variance that you have with some of those rogue builds, especially after, let's say, Pit 95 or so, this actually becomes a bit of a problem. But until then, if you want to just like blast and, have fun and farm like lower tiers or something like 75s, 80s, 85s even, you can very consistently blast down everything. And okay, sometimes the boss takes in like a minute or something, but other bosses die in 10 seconds on those tiers as well. Yeah, you just have to be aware that there is, single target bosses and then there's ad bosses, and that actually makes a big difference. In any case, let's jump into the planner. I'll show you what it's all about and how the setup works. So I have two different versions here, the standard and the mythics, where we have Shroud and Stardust that I replace here. So there's Concussive and a Conceited Ring and a bunch of other stuff that is included here, but that stays the same throughout, the entire progression basically. You can also check out Darkside's max roll guide here, so I want to give a shout out to him. This is what I based my setup on as well, so I mostly took his planner, I tweaked it a bit, made it more to my liking, but it's largely based on this, so you can also read up on everything. There's also a bit more information about the progression, how to put everything together, how to play it, and so on. You also have the different like step priority things here. You have the variants, starter, ancestral, and so on. So if you want to see that from Darkside, you can also go check out the Maxwell guide here, which is very similar. I explained a few things at the start already. Some of the key uniques here: Cowl of the Nameless, you get some Duriel. It has ranks to Trigger Tags. Trigger Tags is this insanely strong key passive here that also double dips with precision. So this is like the main culprit for this, variance in boss fights especially. This is like true for every other precision build as well. You always go Cowl plus lots of Trigger Tag ranks, and you always have this insane gap between AoE and single target bosses. This is not just a Rain of Arrows thing, but this is how it works. This is just a very, very powerful helm because in most situations it does work and gives you a big power spike. But then sometimes it just doesn't and it feels bad, but this is how it is. You have the Fist of Fate here. This is to stagger bosses, especially on the higher end. Stagger is where you deal all of the damage as a rogue. You can't do anything about it. You have a lot of extra damage bonuses against crowd-controlled enemies. For example, stuff like Frigid Finesse, stuff like Paragons here. We have Cold Immunity that gives you extra damage against Frozen. So there's various things like that in every rogue build. This means you want to stagger as much as possible. And in this case, the Fist of Fate also just helps us with extra damage boost. We already have a bunch of pretty good aspects here that boost our damage, and Fist of Fate with a high roll on the unique affix also is basically the same as another good legendary affix. So this is pretty good. Here we have Frostbitten, just more damage mostly, and we try to fix our res and armor with stuff like the pants here. You see in general there's not that many legendary items. There's only the pants and then 2 weapons, and that's actually it. Everything else is unique in the mythic variant. Here you have a little bit more, so you have like some room to work with. But in the Mythics variant, there's I think 8 uniques and then 3 legendaries. So it's pretty tight here with like the stats and like what you can put there. Beastfall boots, I mentioned this at the start. This is very important. You want to make sure that you have 150 maximum resources. So you can do this with either the boots and then master working it up, for example, or you use, for example, just the boots and then a potion. But either way, you want to hit 150 maximum resources. This is important because with the preparation combo, we're trying to hit our Rain of Arrows cooldown down to roughly 10 seconds. It's very easy to do when you invest a few ranks, and then you have the Rain of Arrows cooldown reduction here on the neck that basically caps you out at the 75% mark. So when you have, let's say, 5 ranks here with 75% cooldown reduction, this 41 seconds actually becomes 10.25. And in that case, 2 preparation procs give you the full cooldown reset, and you can cast it instantly again. So for this, we need 150 energy, and the main way to get that is the Beastfall boots. There is also the option to mega masterwork these Beastfall boots. So instead of using a potion, for example, you can do something like this here, or you can also have, for example, just 2 casts of flurry in between your Rain of Arrows casts. Usually I would recommend to go for a 1-1 combo where you do 1 flurry, 1 rain of arrows, and so on. That seems to be the most DPS from my testing, but it is also an option to, for example, get started with worse gear if you can't hit that 150 requirement and just cast flurry twice, for example, because you spend like, let's say 130 on the first, and then you spend like another 20 on the next, and there you go. So this is also an option to reset this. Then we have the Sky Hunter here. This is a pretty important weapon for 2 reasons. Number 1, it has lots of extra damage for your precision passive. So every time you have the 4 precision combo, you get an extra damage bonus. You also get resources back, so this helps to actually refill all of the resources. Every time you cast your flurry, you lose all of your resources, and then you get it back from the rain of arrows when you have all the precision stacks. That gives you like a big boost here. And you also have the chance for marks and projectiles to cast twice. So in Season 6, the temper for rain of arrows was changed from a cast twice temper to a double damage temper. So now we actually benefit from 2 separate weapon tempers, so to say. So we have once the rain of arrows deals double damage here, so we try to get 100% from our weapons and our neck. So this is pretty easy because you don't even need to masterwork it, basically, if you have good rolls. And then we have this here, so you get both effects at the same time. You get double the amount of waves and deal double damage. So you want to try to masterwork this or get a GA here, for example, to get as much as possible out of this. And otherwise, you want to invest into crit damage. You see this here already. This weapon has a ton of crit damage. This is a precision build where crit damage scales up your overall damage output, and you want to try to get it as much as you can. So you also temper crit damage. We have crit damage here and here. On the standard variant, we have a normal ring that also has crit damage. So you can get a lot of crit damage here. You try to get as much as possible. There's also the reason why we have Pit Fighter Skull. So that's the next unique here. Pit Fighter Skull also gives you a crit damage buff, and this also double dips with precision. So this is getting buffed in the patch. Previously, it was kind of like plus minus even with a normal ring, but now this ring is getting a 45% damage buff instead of 33. And then that double dips again with the precision, because first you deal more damage, then also precision has a bigger value. So it's really powerful, and you want to try to use this, which is very easy. You just throw a smoke grenade, and then you get this cloud of shadows buff, where you get this like 45% extra crit damage for 6 seconds after throwing it. So you don't even have to do anything for it. The only thing that you can do better or worse here is standing in multiple clouds and then permanently getting this stealth effect. And then you see here there's like a big value of damage on next attack after stealth. So you can actually try to, like, for example, spawn a few of those clouds, just like spam smoke grenade like 3-4 times or something right before a stagger phase, for example, on the boss. And then as you cast all of your other skills without casting the smoke grenade again, you will constantly go into stealth, come out of stealth, go into stealth, come out of stealth, because it constantly triggers that effect, and you get this extra 1000% additive bonus, which sounds like a lot, but in the overall damage output, it will probably mean something like a 20% increase or so if you do this perfectly. It's not that crazy, but it could be like a nice little, extra damage burst when you play this well. Then we have the starters, guys. Since you constantly spend a lot of resources, that's just a nice damage buff. We also have really good stats here, lots of attack speed especially. We don't really care about the core skill ranks here, for example. We do have Flurry on our bar. And as I mentioned, it can also go with other core skills, but you don't actually invest into that skill. Your Flurry does no damage in the setup. You don't care about that. This is mostly just because of the 50% buff and the attack speed here. And lucky, it also doesn't hurt. And here we have Word of Arcana. This is another key unique. You need to have this before you get started. So you want to try to farm this from Giguar. And this has, first of all of the cooldown that we need. It has the double damage thing. The imbuement skill ranks doesn't really matter. That used to be an important thing in the past, but now not so much, because we went from a poison build to a cold build. Now with the recent buffs to a chemical mixture, maybe we could see something like a poison arrows come back as well. I might try that, and then something like the imbuement skill ranks are important. But for a cold build, it doesn't really matter. So don't worry about this stat. Just try to get a lot of ultimate damage and the cooldown, get it to like 75 here basically, and then you're set on this. Lastly, we have 2 legendary aspects here. They are offensive buffs, Arrow Storms and Vengeful. They basically do the same thing. They produce even more arrows raining down from the sky, and most importantly, they buff your Rain of Arrows damage. So you see this here, this is the bottom 3 lines. Yeah, Arrow Storms deals 65% increased damage. We have this effect here on the Word of Arcana that makes your Rain of Arrows benefit from those damage buffs. So those two aspects here are actually the strongest two aspects that you can put on your build, and that's why we have them included here. These are the only two offensive aspects that we have. If you don't have the starter Sky's Ring, you go Conceited. So this is like another like the damage buff here, but it's already slowly getting to like the weaker side. This is why you want to have the starters here later. A few notes about the skill tree. So this is the setup that we have here. You need to put 2 points in basic to progress. We don't actually use a basic skill. We have a bunch of defensive effects here. For example, there's lots of Dark Shroud ranks. We have stuff like Sturdy. We can actually invest into these things. There's also Rugged here that I like. That gives you lots of damage reduction. You definitely want to invest into this cluster of passives. There's a lot of offensive damage passives. There's Weapon Mastery, Unstable Elixirs. Try to use your potion once every 10 seconds or in longer boss fights, at least during your staggered phases. It's a pretty big buff here, especially with the Cult of the Nameless giving you extra ranks. Trigger attacks, obviously, talked about this. Balestra, you can try to use this as much as possible, but yeah, sometimes it's not up, sometimes it is up. I wouldn't worry too much about it. You can also take out these points if you feel like you're not evading enough, and you can put them somewhere else. For example, you have Agile here. You get lots of dodge as well whenever you cast something. With the Smoke Grenade, we have more damage passives. As I mentioned, in some cases where you go to higher tiers, you can also do a few tweaks here. So we have Shadow Step and Dash. I would recommend to keep Shadow Step on your bar at all times, but you could technically get away without it as well and just go no agility skill at all. And you could run Poison Trap for extra damage and Caltrops for extra damage if you want, maybe combined with like one Caltrops duration temper for like the higher end of pushing. You might get more out of this, but it's gonna make it like much more clunky. And especially for like, you know, farming, I would definitely recommend the double agility combo. And maybe for the higher tiers, I would at least keep the Shadow Step. And then, for example, I went with the Poison Trap because it doesn't require a temper. And it's just like way more comfortable to use than Caltrops. And it still gives you a nice damage buff here with the Subverting Poison Trap, 15% extra. The good thing about this is, yeah, we do Cold Imbuement as like our main scaling mechanism and crits and so on. But Rain of Arrows is actually imbued by all 3 types of imbues at the same time, and it actually counts as all damage types at the same time. So it's cold, shadow, and poison. So it works from all of this. So in this case, for example, this poison buff actually applies to all of the damage done. There's also, for example, Eldritch Bounty here that we have that gives you this damage buff for using an imbued skill of a certain type, and you actually get 3 20% damage buffs from just casting Rain of Arrows. So this is like a massive node here, and this is, you know, part of this like multi-imbue effect that you should kind of know about. Then we have the imbuements here. So we invest like these 3 points. We just get 8 from the item here and then 1 point in Shadow Imbuement. The Shadow Imbuement pops don't really benefit us, but most importantly, we get the mixed Shadow Imbuement here. So it's just like an extra damage buff or having, you know, this spect basically. It's kind of nice. We have 1 point in Poison Imbuement. You can also go through Deadly Venom. It doesn't really matter. And this is mostly to get to alchemical advantage, extra attack speed, extra lucky hit. And then we have cold here. The big one is the mixed cold imbuement where we deal 40% extra against frozen enemies. We also have frigid finesse here against frozen enemies to get even more damage. And this is where most of this comes from. And lastly, here we have Rain of Arrows, so I want to invest into like 5 points. And here we do extra damage against crowd control enemies. As far as I know, this only works for the first wave, so it seems buggy, and Rain of Arrows might not actually be, you know, doing all of the damage it should. But it also means that you have to know that the first wave is the strongest one because various things only apply to the first wave, like this one here. And then the following up waves here that come from Rain of Arrows are not as potent. So don't rely on them to like finish everything off when it's like half dead or something like that. So you have to get a bit of like a feeling for this, like how much damage do you deal against certain enemies, against a certain tier. And with more muscle memory and more experience, you're also gonna speed up your runs knowing about this. And then we have Until Dawn here. This is a pretty big passive, part of the reason why ultimate skills are actually really good right now on the rogue. This is a big damage buff. And lastly, Second Wind. This gives us barriers all the time. We get all the time, basically every time you cast Flurry, you spend all of your energy, boom, you proc this. So you are very well protected and you don't actually need a very large life pool to survive. So this is where most of your recovery comes from. You have like this perma barrier all the time. It's just like a really powerful defense. So for example, you have a Second Wind tempered as well. Here on the pants, I put Second Wind, and this gives you like basically full life barrier all the time. You can also put like an Amethyst if you want. If you want to boost this a little bit, you can get to 100% barrier, for example, or you can put an extra point in there. So you can tweak this a little bit, but you don't have that much dexterity in this build since you have so many uniques. I don't really have a lot of main stat, so I would really recommend to go with the emeralds here in the pants. And for example, compared to many other builds, we don't actually put our runes into our two-handed weapon. Usually the weapon gems are kind of bad, but since we have precision, and all this crit damage scaling, we go for crit damage gems. So you actually don't want to put the runes here. This is actually more valuable. So your dex is kind of low, and in this case, we go with dex gems here, and this is pretty much about it. You try to get maybe a little bit of dex here. You can maybe replace the life if you want, get a bit more dex, and then you have a bit more damage output as well. Now for the paragons, this looks actually very funny. This is like my paragon tower, so I just kind of put this together, and this is what it looks like. Most importantly, especially if you're very low level, you might want to like tweak this a bit and maybe respec later, but Eldritch Bounty is by far the strongest node here on this entire tree, because as I mentioned, to get a Word of Arcana, you get a triple benefit. So if you're like very low level, maybe get that first and then later spec to this. But overall, I just try to min-max this here around, picking up really good stuff. You have lots of res, life, armor. Just make sure you stay capped here, since we don't have many legendary items to actually cap our resistances and so on. Maybe you want to invest into those things a little bit early as well. If you're not at Paragon 300 or close to it, just make sure you have your res kind of capped here. In this case, you also have Rahir to give us extra res or armor in case you need, depending on what you got on your gear. But here we kind of cap it out at the end, but it's kind of tight. So focus on armor and resistances as much as you need to. And otherwise, we pick up Cheap Shot, we pick up Tricks of the Trade. So here, every 8 seconds, we need to cast a Cutthroat skill, meaning either Dash, Shadow Step, or Flurry. We do that all the time anyway, so this is easy to do. No Witnesses, we get that all the time, just from using our Rain of Arrows. And then Eldritch Bounty, we also get that automatically. So it's pretty chill to activate all these nodes. And you have a bunch of glyphs here. We have Fluidity, so you want to try to use one agility skill every 6 seconds. In this case, like Shadow Step or Dash, but we do that frequently. We have Versatility. This is a big damage buff for arrows, 25% on the secondary there. We have Canny, extra damage for non-physical. We have Combat. You want to max this out as much as possible. Combat and crit damage is like your bread and butter basically. So you want to get this up as fast as possible. And then we have Control here for more extra damage against frozen, stunned, etc. I also have a setup here for lower paragons. If you're not at 300, I have a 250 paragon setup. And if you're like lower level, then you just have to like remove more points from some clusters, maybe some of the defensive clusters, or maybe some of the glyphs and so on. So you can tweak this depending on what paragon you are, but I made those 2 versions at least, because I think at this point in the season probably a lot of people have actually reached this level or close to it at least. But the paragon doesn't change. We have that the same here in both variants, so you can see just by changing this setup. And that also concludes the guide. So hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun with Rain of Arrows lately, and now with the patch making it even stronger, I think this is actually a really good build to play, especially if you want to push beyond Pit 100. But even for farming, just like for Torment 4 content, it is fairly fast. It's not like the fastest, but it works. And it's just really cool to see all these arrows like coming down all the time. So I recommend go try it out. As I mentioned, I'll have this linked in the description here. It's Darkside's written guide as well. So go check it out, send him some love, and I'll see you guys next time.